maple syrup. Hey, there we go. Yeah, I think I played a minor chord or something that I shouldn't have played, or I left a finger off a string. I don't know, but it didn't sound great, and I think I woke the dog up. But
You see that?
welcome everybody. Yeah. I did see this. Like, what is that dissonant note that your friend played? Strange human. Uh, welcome to Maple Syrup. We're here. It's Wednesday night. It is 9 o'clock in the evening here in Canada, which means it's 9 o'clock in the morning ish over in Australia.
Depends on where you are.
Yeah, so we are. Yeah, so we are like a whole 12 hours time difference from our very special guest tonight, Mr. Ian O'Toole. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Yeah, it's great. It's good to finally see you. I'm fine. How's everything in Australia during this strange time of life that we're living in with the pandemic?
Varied, because Australia is super big.
Yeah.
I'm in Western Australia, and we've had a super easy time of it. I'm happy to say, we've basically had pretty much no COVID the whole time.
Right, but there are areas of Australia that have been hit, right?
Yes, and continue to be. Yeah, so we have the benefit of isolation and pretty much hard closed borders. So that's
right.
That's how we've gotten through.
People off an island more so than
yeah, almost. Yeah.
All right, so let's get right to it. Let's ask Ian our first question. So our first question is, Ian, what is your origin story? How did you start gaming? When did you start gaming? And when did you decide, like, hey, this corporate gig is not for me. I want to do art for board games.
When did the job come out of the hobby kind of?
Yeah.
The path to that.
Right. So gaming wise, I played D&D when I was a kid. I played plenty of role-playing games when I was a kid. And then I pretty much took a break from it until probably my mid-20s, really. I played video games and things like that in between. But as regards tabletop games, it wasn't until I came to Australia, had kids, or had a kid at the time, was spending more time indoors and keeping busy and having odd schedule and stuff like that. So myself and a few friends just started playing what was then, Axis and Allies and things like that. And then one of my friends bought a copy of Catan for birthday or Christmas, I can't remember, and then quickly followed up with Dominion, I think was the next one. And from that, we have a local board gaming association here,
right,
that meets every two weeks. Okay. And once I discovered that, and we went along to that, and that was that.
It.
Pretty much that was that.
You're bitten by the bug.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
So a lot of people have very similar stories, by the way. It's like always like, and then after I, was finished with school, I started gaming again, and then Catan came along, and then
I discovered the German games.
Yeah.
I love the gaming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have the same story of, like I played a lot of D&D as a kid and, through high school, but then, had to give it up or just gave it up during college and, young adulthood when, getting married, having kids, all that kind of stuff. So, I'm just trying to say you're not that special. I'm kidding. No. I'm kidding. You are very, very special.
So you're now part of like a game group, which is what most people end up doing, especially if they can.
Right.
Also having the access.
So have you been meeting to game all this COVID time?
Pretty much. Yeah. We
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I'm and I were like, we haven't left our house.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, back in March of last year, we had like 2 weeks literally where we couldn't. And then all the webcams sold out everywhere, and everyone went nuts. And then 2 weeks later, not everything, it was, we were allowed.
So what you're saying is that we could get a whole bunch of like cheap webcams.
Probably, yeah.
I don't think it'll be so cheap once the duty kicks in, but it's a nice spot.
Probably not.
I'm just gonna move there. Is what I'm gonna do.
You know what?
Actually, it's funny.
I've traveled a lot of places in the world. And I can say Sydney's one of the few places that actually felt like Toronto.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't spent much time in on the eastern states at all because I'm Irish. I'm only here since well, it's like 13 or 14 years now. But anyway, we spend a little time over in the eastern states, but very little, mostly in Melbourne.
Right.
Yeah, not really much else though.
So somebody else who is roughly in your time zone, Shem Phillips says, "Hey, love your work, Ian. I don't sound at all like a New Zealander when I'm talking, but imagine it was in the voice of
I
like,
can imagine sounding like.
well, imagine it was, if you can't imagine Shem, imagine it was, one of
No,
the
I
guys from
meant
Flight of the
not Shem.
Conchords.
I meant you.
Oh, I don't sound.
New Zealand version of you.
I don't even know what that would
I don't
sound
even know
like.
what that would sound like. I don't think I want to know.
I don't know. Anyway, Shem loves your work. He loves
Hey,
our
Shem.
work too, Son and Erica. Goes without saying, right? And Shem is another one of those people that I think about when I think of pairings of artists and designers, right? Like Shem
Right.
and the Miko and you and Lacerda and stuff like that. So it's very funny that Shem's watching today. But yeah, so that's your origin stories. That's where you got into gaming. Now, how did you make the transition from merely being a player to like being by far and away, I think if I was to poll, gamer, he's only for Lacerda. No, but really, how did you make this jump?
yeah.
How did you make the big jump? And what were you doing before?
So I've been a graphic designer and a sometimes illustrator for basically since I left university, since I left college. So I've done branding and advertising. Just before I started doing board games, I was doing a lot of 3D design, so design for exhibits and museums and stuff like that. And I went through a period of basically trying to figure out how I could work for myself because I was getting a lot of flow off freelance work, not gaming related at all. But once I did that, I had, I just kind of wanted to diversify my client base a little bit. And I thought, oh, it'd be fun to do one game. And I posted some stuff on Board Game Geek, and I ended up getting a game out of that, which was just a design. It wasn't a publisher; it was just a designer who was going to do a game on Kickstarter at the time. And then very soon, through a series of quite random and haphazard events, I ended up very quickly doing The Gallerist and Nemo's War and A Study in Emerald, second edition, pretty much. And they're just sort of, once I had done those three games and people actually started to recognize my name on things and stuff like that, and it kind of just went from there. But those three projects were very randomly generated, I could say.
Right.
Serendipity.
Very much so. Yeah. Just whether
So,
it's just through meeting people in person or through randomly emailing somebody or,
that's so interesting. You never like had an intention or a plan. It just kind of happened.
Yes, sort of. There was
to a degree, right?
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was definitely intention. I mean, Nemo's War, I emailed them and literally said, "Can I work on this game?" I just never expected them to say yes, because at the time I hadn't worked on any game. So I mean, I had a portfolio of design and illustration that I could show them, but none of it was in any way relevant to gaming, and especially not to Nemo's War.
Right.
But for some reason, they said yes, and that was that. Martin Wallace for Study in Emerald, I play tested one of his games at a convention, and we just got talking, and he out of the blue said, "Do you know anything about, the Cthulhu mythos and all that?" And I said yes, and he said, "Would you be interested in working on this?" And I was like, "Well, maybe, yeah, sure." And with Vital, I emailed him because I really like his games, and I emailed him to ask basically about the possibility of working together. I think at that stage I was kind of entertaining the notion of possibly publishing some games as well.
Oh, okay.
Pretty short-lived notion, but it was there. So I wanted to ask him about some of his games that were known to be in development but hadn't been announced. You know,
Right.
as as being assigned to a particular publisher. And he said, "No, we can't do that, but we need an artist for the gallerist." And I was like, "Okay, well, we'll do that then."
Yeah. So
So
if
yeah.
you were to publish a game, what would the name of the company be?
Oh, I have no idea.
You did what?
Oh,
You didn't like do all the
what part of
branding and
this
everything
did
for
No,
it?
no, 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 no,
you
no.
had ideas for the games you were going to do? You didn't necessarily think about like the company you were creating. Is that where you're kind of
To be
direction?
honest, the reason why it probably didn't come to anything is I didn't really have a proper vision at all. What I was investigating was what were the possibilities of having a publishing company where all of the art costs are in-house, basically. Like,
Right.
does that make it more or less viable? And also geographically where I am, etc., etc. So,
Yeah.
you know, as regards to like a creative vision, I hadn't gotten there yet.
Like no business plan was written.
No,
I think
no,
it's
no, no.
really I think it's really interesting.
with your art instead. Then is basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that you have installation experience. Not a lot of it's funny. So a lot of people don't think about that when they think about graphic designers. They mostly modern now. They think about web design and stuff like that. But Josh Capel did installations first. You've done
Interesting.
installations.
Yeah.
There's quite a couple other ones that have done like a lot of work on storefront installations. Leslie
Right.
Chung does those, and it actually is this really neat skill set where I think you have a different sense of vision and scale because of it. That kind of shows. It's just like as a you know what I mean, like a big like this is a display and we're looking at the whole thing and it's an installation.
Sure.
It has a holistic vibe to it.
Yeah.
And there's only a few people that actually get that. Matt Paquette did a lot of installation stuff for museums and the bank that he worked at and things like that. So it's just really cool to hear that there's it's not just I did web pages and translated over to here. I find that people who have done more of the like the physical stuff with graphic
Yeah.
design, whether it's print, like actual 3D like print or installations have a really good sense of product more so, I think, anyway.
Well, what it is like that inherent understanding of usability that comes
Yeah. In space.
that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah.
That it eats up space. It's not just virtual. It takes up
How are you what's the presence of this? How's it gonna look? Like people don't realize this, but like every major store that does this for not only their internal displays, their external displays, like you name it. Every inch is designed like this.
Yeah.
Sure.
Overall
It's all thoughtful.
usability, and then it's also what's competing for the space. They know exactly what the prime space is based on where your eye goes, right? All of that is a factor, and it is a really important factor because you're doing the exact same thing even with like a box cover. It's also about the competition of space and what's going to be seen first and should be that prime real estate and what shouldn't be. And it's interesting because it's all the same theoretics, right? Just being applied to like a different space.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I had actually never thought about that link before. I'll be honest.
Really weird link.
You just do it. You just have the skills.
I guess
and you do.
so. Yeah. I
yeah.
did installation design for like 5 years. I didn't particularly like it, to be honest, which is maybe why I kind of left it in the past. I like doing museum work, but a lot of my work was sort of corporate trade show exhibits, and it's not really my thing. But yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really considered that link.
Josh Dirksen, who is another excellent graphic designer, says installations are just table presence and shelf appeal in a different format, right? And I think so, right? Yeah. I know a lot of like Leslie, who I talked to quite a bit about this. That's his forte is like window display, and so everything he makes just like pops like off the table. It just like looks amazing, and he's Leslie's the guy that will make like 3D. He made a 3D hippodrome to play like Spartacus in, like he'll just make all these huge like display like things. He made me we were talking about Legend of Korra. He made me a 3D
hydraulic one, right?
board with a hydraulic center
Oh,
that
you're
lifts
kidding.
yeah, it's just a syringe with water, but it's awesome. It just lifts all the characters up.
Simplified
It's so
hydraulics
cool.
at their core, but yeah, like a science
That's
experiment
amazing.
of a game board.
Yeah. And
Wow.
he just does this for fun
Yeah.
because he's so used to making like window displays, right, and stuff that has to like
Right.
take up that space in a visual and have visual impact. So it's really cool.
It's important.
See, you're finding out all about yourself. You never
you
knew
go.
you came on the Maple Syrup Show to get like a
At least those
past
5
life
years
regression and
weren't
some
wasted.
analysis.
Well, you're going
I
from
don't think so.
yeah, it's technical, but if you actually think about what you gain from it, I wouldn't be surprised if you use it all the time.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adam's asking, what themes would you like to illustrate or design for more often or less often? Oh, that's interesting.
Are you constantly told like, hey, make these dudes look like this, make animal people? Like, I don't know. Like, I guess he's asking.
Not really. I
to actually get to draw if you could.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough. Right, yeah, I'm lucky enough that I tend not to get super pigeonholed style-wise because I hop around styles an awful lot. If I get pigeonholed in anything, I think it's sort of heavier Euros. I think people kind of think, and I think that's probably more for my graphic design than for my illustration. As regards themes and settings, I'm honestly what tends to attract me is if I haven't done it before.
Right.
It's just something new. I like doing historical stuff, but I also like doing fantasy and science fiction stuff. I kind of want to do something based on everything that I enjoy myself, right? So
Right.
I kind of want to be part of all the things, which is what kind of brought me to working in board games. If I enjoy something, I have a natural tendency to want to be part of creating that thing. So I really like comics and books and all sorts of things, historical stuff. There's a ton of stuff. But honestly, what'll catch my eye first is if I haven't done anything like it before.
Oh, that's really cool.
Or
So
if something is super specific. I
tell
also
us
quite
about
enjoy
that.
it.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Well,
you have an example.
Like Nemo's War. That's super specific.
Yeah, I think so. That game is
You're gonna draw
designed
everything in a Victorian nautical style.
yeah. I don't. Yeah. Lisboa is a great example. I mean, Lisboa is 100% designed from the ground up about the city of Lisboa and about that event and that period in history and the time. And I was given the opportunity to also make the visual identity of the game super specific, right?
Like all the way from the color palette to the textual to everything. It like those games that you've done, like they exactly what I said before. They strike me as a holistic product that has a shared vision in all elements, where everything's tied together, and that's what I think draws people to them. Like illustrated games aren't for everybody. Let's say that right away. I mean, they're not easy games to learn and play.
Yeah.
But you've done such a good job with making them at least look approachable that people will say, I can get it from the visuals. Also, I'm intrigued to learn this because it's so appealing. Yeah, I'm willing to try this. I've heard they're difficult, but it doesn't look like a candy-coated kid game, which has happened to some other people where it's like this tough game, but it has this straight, this cartoony feel to it, which is sort of mismatched. But your stuff feels very clean and technical, but still warm and inviting. Like there's not a lot of coldness in your work. Your palettes are warm, and I think that's part of it that is really intriguing to me about. We were talking about games that make you feel calm. Your games, the stuff that you've ever worked on, I think they have that feeling to me. Like I don't feel like when I play them, even though like I'm doing a lot of brain crunching, I don't feel anxious because the way that you've laid out the game, the way that you've done the art and picked the color palette and everything, and because it's so integrated, I don't feel disconnected from anything, and I don't feel like jarred. I think that's I've never actually thought about it until like I'm talking to you, but
you can hear it. You're analyzing like what makes you connected to it. Basically,
Yeah.
you're like, I have a psychological reaction to the art that is actually positive in keeping me continuing playing the game.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. 100%. 100%.
Well, that's really good to hear.
Job well done.
Well, it goes back down to that usability idea, right? It's like you made it that much more approachable when it's like that has nothing to do with the game mechanics or how well so anyone understands it, but you know, as you said, it's like I'm willing to approach it. It makes me feel like not frustrated because like even you can lead people through the natural ideas of how your game works so much easier through visuals than you can sometimes explaining in words. And so I actually I have a question for you because this happens a lot. How do you feel about when the artwork gets broken up amongst different people? So let's say you get hired for the box and someone else gets hired for the insides, or do you run into that very often, or do you actually get
very, very rarely?
Because it seems to be a thing.
Yeah, it definitely is. People generally don't approach me for that because I think I've kind of positioned myself as I do the whole thing.
Right.
So if you want me to do the whole thing, come to me. But if you just want to, I've done a couple of things. Like I did a box cover for, I can't remember what it is. A Railways of the World expansion, the one that Fatal did, the Railways of Portugal or whatever. And I did nothing, just did the illustration. So there's a couple of games I've just done a cover illustration for. There's a couple of games that I've just done the graphic design for, and somebody else has done the illustration. I don't mind doing that, but I don't think it's where I'm at my best, honestly. And I generally tell people this. I'm like, well, you're getting more value for money if you get me to do everything.
I think so.
You're getting more out of my skill set because in a nice way. Almost anyone who can illustrate a picture of a train on a cover. You know what I mean? It's not that specialized. And I'm happy to do it, but I think my skills are best used elsewhere, basically.
Do you think you're a better graphic designer than an illustrator?
Probably, yeah. I think so.
Fair.
Yeah, my approach is definitely graphic design forward.
Right.
I think illustration is where the humanity and whatever that is that you're responding to, that kind of warmth comes into it. I think the graphic design is where I try and help players out as much as possible.
Yeah.
And also in the sort of visual development and product design, which is something I'm also involved in, usually at an early stage, where I'll suggest things that might, cut down on setup time, just a component change, or I'll say, let's not make these 100 tokens. Let's instead make it a track. It's much easier. It's cleaner. All that sort of stuff.
You're doing production development. It sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like that. It's not something I really enjoy that element of it because it's broad strokes problem solving. I really enjoy getting a prototype, particularly of a big game with lots of moving parts.
Oh, you mean like the Certa games?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and playing it and then kind of scribbling all over it and saying, well, if we move this here, that's going to work better, and if we take that off, and if this becomes that, and that becomes this, and these can fit together this way. That's a really nice free form puzzle before I actually get down to the nitty gritty of iconography and stuff like that.
Right. So there's a value add to hiring Ian O'Toole. Yeah, for everybody out there who's looking to hire somebody.
No, it is, because you chop up the pieces, you're going to get the work, but you're not going to get any type of coherency, right? It might fit, like we all follow the same creative brief. It might vaguely shove together properly, but it doesn't mean it really goes by that point.
Right. Well, I mean, a prototype is usually put together. I mean, it's put together by the designer or the publisher, and chances are they have. I mean, like some designers put a lot of thought into the playability, and some don't. So it's a mixed bag. So when I get a prototype, if I was to literally take that format and not question it in any way, then there's a good chance that there's a better solution that I've just lost out on, right? That I've just passed by.
Right.
Simplify through art. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Josh is saying that it's nice to hear another graphic designer who ends up doing development talking about this.
Well,
Josh works for
exactly.
Lynn Vander, so he's doing it all the time.
Right.
But other
Right.
Josh Capel, so he's also like a triple threat, kind of like you, where he'll do the illustration, the graphic design, and he also does like our rule books and editing.
Okay.
Because he does roughly what you do. He's like, let me play this. Oh, that could work better this way. And how come you said this? Well, this is much easier to word it this way. And then so he's doing the layout of the book while he's playing it and saying this board
Right.
needs to be over here. So he's doing the same thing, and it's actually like fascinating to watch him work. I've had the pleasure of working with Josh a bunch of times and just seeing him like take my brain crap and turn it into something that's like reasonably cool in like very little time. And then he puts more work into it and it becomes very, very cool.
Yeah,
And so
it does happen
yeah.
sometimes, and even sometimes the visual design will feed back not to rule changes, but the expression of those rules, right?
Yes.
So it'll be a case where I would maybe think that the options that you're given a player could very easily, without changing anything, be grouped into these three buckets, right? Or you could put
Yeah.
them in these phases that maybe
visually
aren't
organized this way, right?
Right, and that's going to help people learn it and compartmentalize the different parts of the game, and so that's fairly common. That's a fairly common thing to happen, where the visual design will kind of reorder how the game is presented and how the rules are presented.
And I wish that happened more.
Well, it's
like it only really happens with certain graphic designers for us.
Yeah, this is the pitfall of publishers that we're all aware of, who will do anything they can to save money on art. And this is the exact fallout. Like everything you're talking about is the service lost when you do that. And we've got some pretty notorious examples across the board of either publishers or specific game examples of exactly where this goes wrong.
Right.
And it's kind of funny we don't learn a lesson that it's like, so you save some money on the front end, but how much money did you honestly lose on the back end?
Right. Yeah, because it comes down to the user experience, which is really, obviously along with the quality of the game itself, it's really what's going to give a game legs, right? If a game is, even if the game's good, if it's just horrible to use, to learn, if the rulebook's terrible, like it's going to come out in every review.
Like, I don't get where to look right now.
Right.
Yeah.
All this info's there, right? Mm-hmm. Theoretically, the same game is there, but it's not, because no one's ever going to see the game that it should have been.
Right. I mean, that's a really fun question that we should ask more of the graphic designers and illustrators that come on. What game would you want to do a makeover on? He said, this is a good game. I know it's a good game, but oh my gosh, if I had the time and money to just redo it with the graphic design, it would just be that much better. And that's not tooting your own horn. That's just like saying, hey, anybody with some graphic design chops and time could have done a better job at making this. And there's reasons why they don't get made properly, usually money and time. It's usually not lack of skill or lack of desire. It's all those other things. But what's one that you might say, oh, I could take that and do something special with it?
Is there a game that you're just like, I wish I could get my hands on it right now?
Yeah, there's a few. The big one for me has always been Castles of Burgundy.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, because I play that game bunch. So I tend to turn it over in my mind, and it's not from a point of view of. So a lot of people will look at the original edition and to an extent the newer edition of Castles of Burgundy and complain about the artwork, right?
Yeah.
I actually think the first edition of Castles of Burgundy does a pretty good job of presenting that game for what it is. It's clearly dated. Then the illustration is where it falls down. The art direction between the illustration and the design is where it falls down. But from a graphic design perspective, it's pretty good, right? The player aids work. Everything's pretty clear. It just doesn't have that extra bit of polish and cohesion between the graphic design and the illustration. And it's got no regard for a sense of setting or anything like that, right? So they just, obviously, they were like, that's fine. We don't need to worry. We don't need to worry about that.
Chunky pieces, connect them. You get it.
Yeah. I think there's a different way to do that. I think there's a better way to do it. In fact, I know there is. And I would love to have a chance to do that. I would very much like to. Another one, which is another Feld game, is Carpe Diem.
Oh yeah.
Carpe Diem had a lot of decisions made that I think for a very simple game got in the way, just of the experience, and I think that would be a really fun one for me to do, because it's a real nice, concise game. There's not that much in it, you know what I mean? It's a nice.
You could do it's a complete package that you could do a lot of good stuff with. Shem Phillips
and I think it would make a big difference to the. I think it would make a big difference to the overall experience of that game.
Right. Yeah, I talk about experience first design a lot, and this is the other side of that, experience first, like the actual usability.
This is the UX right here, right?
Yeah,
like this is really
that's exactly
experience.
What it is. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest sin, besides the color inconsistency stuff for setup and all, which is just, besides all that's been talked about quite a lot. I think one of the biggest sins with Carpe Diem is it uses cards for victory points, and it's just not a good experience. It's horrible. It makes the act of
why did you do that?
Yeah, it just makes the act of getting points a pain. And it shouldn't be a pain. It should be a good thing.
It should be rewarding to get these points.
Yeah, you got to go sort out the cards, and it's a mess. Yeah.
Yeah, Shem Phillips is saying Toi, that he'd want to get the icons redone. Such a beautiful game, but those icons are so unintuitive. Candice Young is asking you a question. She asks, "How do you design the game components too, or just do the art and graphic design? So do you do like 3D components, product design, that kind of stuff as well?"
Yeah. So typically, I do everything that's inside the box and the box. So yeah, all of the game components to an extent. So I'm a low level digital sculptor, very low level. So I have enough to do, to get me by when I was doing my exhibition stands and stuff like that.
Right.
I have enough to produce a visual of the games that I make, and that's actually quite an important part of my process. Is I visualize it on an ongoing basis as opposed to just at the end when it's done.
That's cool.
So yeah, definitely, particularly for like a Euro game, for instance, with, like, let's just say on Mars, for instance, it's super important for me to design those components, because it often also feeds into the iconography, right? Those components are represented in the iconography, and it's also it's very important to me from a product design and a visual identity of a game point of view, to have those components be cohesive with the overall design of the game.
Just going to use the same word.
And it's where I often push back, because I often get, every now and then I get manufacturers contacting me, and they go, "Do you know the stuff that we can do in resin now? Like, it's amazing." And I'm like, "No, I know, but for this game, I just because we can doesn't mean we should, right?"
Even tactileness. There's people who are to just a tactile touch of something. Why people are diehard about, let's say, like wooden components versus plastic or whatever it is.
It's the weight
is a huge factor to people. That
it's a huge deal to me as a player as well. It's a huge deal to me. Like, one thing is that tactility. I really don't like sleeved cards, for instance. I cannot play with sleeved cards. I hate it.
I know the
same.
Oh, really?
Properly, and it drives me crazy.
People laugh when I tell them that the only things that I've ever sleeved in my life are my prototypes. I only sleeve my prototypes.
I barely even sleeve those half the time.
I know nowadays it's like I iterate them so fast that it's like
I've got like
I'll just reprint a new set
with like signatures or something on them. I'm like, that might be the only thing that's sleeved.
Yeah, I think I sleeved Love Letter.
I didn't even sleeve my Magic cards.
Oh God, I wouldn't.
Right. Yeah.
So funny.
So yeah, the tactility of components is super important to me, but it's also the a component to my mind is basically a 3D icon, right? It's basically
that's a really
symbol,
cool way of looking at it.
A symbol in 3 dimensions on the board, because it represents something. It just happens to move around.
Right. So if you see the icon, it should be very analogous to the piece that you're interacting with?
Yeah, that's a part of it, but it's also for clarity of play, right? If I design an icon to represent something and it goes amongst on the board somewhere, then that icon needs to be pretty clear, right?
Right.
So if I design a component to go on the same board, if it's a colored piece of wood with maybe a screen print on it or something, I can make that very clear and very crisp as to what it is. It's basically an icon that stands up, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if
that
it's
is such a cool way of thinking about it.
If it's a miniature,
you just blew my mind.
if it's a miniature, even if that miniature is colored, and to an extent, even if it's painted, it's a noisy thing. It's visually noisy, right? It's got shapes and shadows, and it's just it does not look nearly as clear. Yeah. It's one of those you do that sort of. Well, I do that squint test, right, for contrast.
Oh, I always do squint tests.
Right. So if you squint at something, you go, well, I can't see it anymore, so I need to change it somehow. And I find that with miniatures a lot. I find it's quite difficult to control the silhouette with a miniature, because obviously a miniature turns around an awful lot, and as does a player piece, a wooden piece. But I think the distinctiveness of the silhouette is maintained more easily,
for sure,
on an extruded wooden piece. So that's why, for instance, with the Vital games, they've all had wooden pieces, and there have been times, with On Mars, for instance, a lot of people were saying, can we have miniatures for the rovers and miniatures for the things? And luckily, myself and Vital are on the same page with that, and that's and it's, from my point of view, it's a visual question, right, for the overall visual identity of the game. It's also a usability concern for me,
right?
And I also I don't like mixing as much as possible. I don't like mixing materials.
I think that's smart too.
I'm not a big fan of half the components are wood and half are plastic.
Yeah, no, people don't really consider that, but it's a lot of visual clutter when you start adding other forms of types of media, whatever it is. They're never going to pick up light the same way. They're never going to color the same way. It gets fundamentally, it's really funny. But whether color theory or not,
even your paint will look different on them.
It's not the same as that green. That thing's you can just tell without having any background in it. And the more material types you throw at it, the more likely all of those start to become problematic.
Right.
Candace and Adam just were basically saying that they wanted to ask you if you designed the robots from On Mars. And then Adam said the wood is so nice that he can't imagine the games with resin. And he also agrees that mixing doesn't make it better. Right? I think there's something about that holistic view of the game that we're talking about.
Yeah. The other thing that I always try and put into my work, which is something that I really respond to in other people's work, is I really like to be able to see like the hand of the maker in the work. Does that make sense? So
that makes sense,
I love looking at penciled comic book pages.
Yeah,
I actually respond to them more than I tend to respond to the finished pages. I love stop motion animation, and I love being able to see like thumbprints and hair that moves kind of jankily. I love that, because that to me, especially with animation, that to me is like, it's magic, right? Because part of my brain is going, I can see that that's not a real thing, and the other part of my brain is going, I believe it's a real thing.
It's a real thing,
right? So that to me, so I tend to take that approach with specifically with my illustration work. My graphic design tends to be a lot tighter and more restrained, but my illustration, to counterbalance that, tends to be almost consciously messy in as much as possible. I tend to try and leave things unfinished and purposely introduce chaos into it. So
but I like that about it.
Yeah, no, me
That's
too.
what I like about your art. That is actually what I really appreciate about your art. It has this loose feel. So if you're a comic book fan, and I think you are, my favorite types of comic book artists were always like mixed media people like Dave Mack and Bill Sienkiewicz and things like that. And you have that kind of, it's not the mixed media feel, but you have the looseness of the lines that they always had. They still have, they're still working, obviously. But that's what I really appreciate about your art. It's this sort of, in the looseness of it, it has this interesting freedom of motion in the artwork, but it's all so very tight as a package that you almost need that looseness for it to breathe. I think. Like, I mean, I don't know if I'm wording this correctly, but
polished. It becomes overly polished if you become very much removed from it, right?
Yes.
And that's why it's like
too slick. I don't like it too slick.
Yeah, there's lines that are easy to cross with their meaning too. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. I like that your approach is you're designing an overall package. All of this is already kind of structured and formalized. So I need to give it raw edges to kind of bring some life back to it. So
that's exactly what it is. Because my first pass of the game is graphic design. It's not illustration, and it's often not thematic or setting based at all. Now, I obviously that's all in my head when I'm doing all of this. So I'm thinking, further down the line, this could look like a car or whatever. But the first playtest that I usually do, especially on the heavier games, is only graphic design. So it's basically almost like a white box sample, but a graphic design version of that, right? And that's just a playability thing to make sure that there's no inconsistencies, and if I haven't done something stupid.
Right.
Which I often have.
It happens. How many passes does it take then? If you're starting from like, I've got this box of stuff that the designer or publisher sent me. I'm gonna play it. Then what do? Do you like strip it all down to this white box with graphic design version that we're talking about?
Yeah. So that'll be so the first I'll play the prototype, and then I'll do what we talked about. So kind of try and take it apart and put it back together again. And then from that, I'll develop a basic graphic design prototype. And often when I say a basic graphic design prototype, often it doesn't even have icons. Sometimes it'll just be an icon will be a circle that says build, right? That's it. And it's more of a prototype from an ergonomics point of view, from a product design and ergonomics point of view.
Yeah. So is this like hand drawn, or did you like mock it up?
No. It's usually just very loosely mocked up in InDesign. It's all just boxes and circles.
Yeah.
So there's very little to it.
Some text
but it's not even, honestly.
Just space.
No, it's black and white usually, black, white, and gray. Yeah.
But I like that, right? Because I mean, like, as simple as that is, if it still can communicate everything it needs to communicate, job done. Now we can play around with all the other stuff. Yeah.
And then it becomes a case of, well, how do we make it look engaging and interesting and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But if the bones of it are good, then everything should follow on from that. But it's also an exercise in seeing, how much space do we have to work with? If I want to make this a track, how long is that track? And, how just all these different questions of how we space manage, right? What we talked about with exhibition design.
Yes.
And after that, some things will inevitably change, but then it because depending on the game, then it just becomes a process of doing it, then finishing it, right? So sometimes I'll do all the iconography first. Sometimes I'll do a bunch of illustration. It really depends. And then when that's done, then we build another prototype. I build another prototype, me and my people. And then I'll play that again. I do actually, the we is correct there, because I do have very patient friends who will play test with me.
It's a big important part of this process.
Oh yeah, it really is.
Like, really, Ian, another black and white prototype? Thanks.
Right. Yeah.
You might enjoy the journey by now. To see what
so it's three prototypes usually.
Okay.
And I mean that's for a big game. Smaller games that don't need that much, but like for one of Vital's games, it's at least 3 prototypes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Can I ask rough timelines on some of these things? Because what I'm hearing is as I said, already said it. You added so much extra value to what you're doing, because basically you're doing product design on top of it, right?
Right.
What is the timeline then? on stuff like this?
That can vary greatly. It's usually about a 6-month process.
Okay. No, I'm just curious because I think a lot of
Thereabouts.
people sometimes they're like, oh, I got to go fast. That's why I hired this person. You're like, no, you wanted to go cheap. That's why you hire that person. There's a very
Right.
big difference. Because I thought you were going to say like something way bigger. Like 6 months is not unrealistic.
It can be it can be much bigger.
Mhm.
I mean, I have games that I've worked on for 2 years.
Yes.
But you know, obviously the time actually spent at the desk working on those games is parsed out in different things.
Yeah.
So you know, it really depends. I would say if I was working on a single game only, which never happens, then it would probably be maybe a 4-month process.
Do you?
Thereabouts.
I mean, this is not to take work away from you in any way, but you're an incredibly busy person, and it sounds like honestly, this is what I mean. Game designers dream about is someone who's going to help with the product design. Because let's be honest, most people are not mass market companies who have these people built in. So you're effectively offering 2 jobs for that value, and whether you see it that way or not, you are.
Yeah,
2
I
jobs,
guess so.
essentially.
Yeah.
2 services for one. That it just kind of floors me that, you know, people first off aren't seeking that out more, because realistically you are getting 2 for the price of 1. And then the idea is like, do you know more, you know, graphic designers who are kind of taking the same approach? Because I got to think, I mean, like if I knew this, there was more people doing this, I'd be like, book them up, like go get all of them.
Right. I don't know a huge amount of graphic designers. I know I tend to know more illustrators. They tend to be more
Because
more
you're working with, yes, yeah.
Yeah, or maybe I think illustrators tend to be called out more. There are more, you know, if you ask the average gamer to name their 5 favorite illustrators and name their 5 favorite graphic designers, I think most might struggle with graphic designers.
Right.
I think the difference between the two, I'll be fully honest.
Sure. And there's obviously some bleed over in, you know,
Yep.
some of the illustrators that I know also do graphic design and things like that. But I don't know that many what I would call like tabletop graphic designers. They are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly have not worked directly with any.
I need to like create a group of y'all and just like
Yeah.
I mean, like I know a lot because I work with a lot of different ones, but yeah,
Right.
there'd be no
I
reason
know.
for you to work with a lot of them,
Well, I
right?
was gonna say, but the idea we've worked like, you know, worked with plenty of graphic designers over the years, but the idea of like a graphic designer that also focuses on the actual package design with everything
Right.
else.
So that's the thing that I'm saying. Like, you know, if you ask me to recommend some graphic designers, I could do that, but I don't work with them or am in contact with them enough to know that is or isn't also
design with it.
Part of what they do.
But
Yeah, exactly.
say, like what a value package right there. It's amazing. Yep. You know, again, what people will not pay up front, but what they're monstrously losing on the back end.
Yeah, there's I mean, there's definitely a few people that I would say are in that mindset, like Gavin Brown of Roxley Games.
Sure.
Pushing them forward. You know
yeah. Gavin is a graphic designer by trade, but he's, you know, obviously doing the publishing end right now too.
Yeah, his angle though is because he has a lot more control. Might be a little because I mean he's sort of in charge of the product, not just.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's different now, is what I'm saying. But he's also that type of from the bottom to the top. He will lay out everything about what a product's supposed to be. Josh is like that. Josh Capel's like that as well. Josh Dirksen will do that because he has like, I think it's anybody who has their own development studio, because all 3 of the people I just named like run Roxley or Linder or you know, Kids Table Board Game and Burnt Island, right? So those in-house. Yeah, they have a lot more say and a lot more vision. So you might be one of the only freelancers I know that does it to that level. But again, there might be other ones that are out there.
Call yourself forward if you do, because I'm going to say right now, if you come out there and say, "Hey, I'm a graphic designer that also does product design and like package design and like, you know, all this other stuff," it's like hire that person.
Yeah.
Now.
Shem is saying, I think most graphic designers also do a lot of other work like design, development, publishing, illustration, etc. And you're right. There's a lot of people who wear many, many hats in this industry. Let's move on. I wanted to actually ask you a couple things. You said before that you like history and like things that you never did before in terms of the illustration of a subject. How much research do you do when you do art for things? Like, did you like research like Mars rovers and the Martian landscape and all that kind of stuff? Or you just kind of say, oh, this is what it looks like in my dream, so I'm going to draw that. I don't know.
It depends. It depends a lot on the game, right? So some games are, historically based. So Lisboa again is a good example of that. I tend to do a lot of visual research, and that basically means looking into relevant styles of illustration and design. Now, relevant can mean either if it's a fictional setting, then looking at similar things, right? If it's a fantasy game, then reminding myself what sort of fantasy illustration that I respond to and trying to find something in there. Same with science fiction. If it's historical, then I'll always take a look at what was being produced at the time and what it looked like, right? So and not to keep going back to Lisboa, but that's where the visual style for Lisboa came from, right? Those painted tiles,
actual things that come
right.
from Lisboa.
Yeah, and that's not a it's not a definite thing that I go to that period and I produce illustration as if it was made in that period. But it is, for me, it's very important to understand the context of what was happening then and that sort of stuff. And then there's a decision to be made about how anachronistic we get with the presentation of the game and the setting, right? And that sometimes that comes down to usability. Sometimes that's just an artistic decision. So I tend to do quite a bit, but it's very scattered. I guess a lot of it's, as I said, a lot of it's visual thing. I'll do research into like typefaces and stuff. All just nerdy graphic design stuff, and printing methods. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah. I love that stuff too.
Just how things were printed back then and what methods were used, and that type of thing. I also, if it's possible, this is again super nerdy graphic design stuff, but I tend to look at, although it wasn't called UX, what UX was at the time, based on what they were, based on what people were interacting with at the time, and if there's
so like
sometimes that's just an interesting thing for me to look at.
It really is. It's fascinating actually.
Yeah,
like
but
sometimes at the posters of times, things like that.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes it'll spark something that actually becomes a big part of it. But then I also, I look at the setting as much as possible. Again, obviously much more important if it's a historical game. I'm working on a game with Mind Clash at the moment called Voidfall, which is a completely fictional setting. But it's been really important to work with them because they're super into their storytelling and
they really are,
and their theme and all that. And I haven't worked with many publishers who are in the past, so it's been really different for me to like delve deep into, well, why does this look like this, and what happened before this, and all of that sort of stuff in a fictional way.
So are you helping to create like the visual Bible for the Voidfall world? Very cool.
Yes. Yeah. So that's been really good. That's been really rewarding because, again, that's another type of work that I've seen that I really respond to. I really like concept design and all of that sort of stuff. So that is kind of a form of research, sort of.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and it's also coming up with fictional representations of culture.
Yep.
That are also in one way believable and seem like it might actually be a thing, another way not horribly inappropriate.
Let's talk about that.
Also, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's a funny one. It's like I always love the historical accuracy debate when you're like, so no one else existed at this time, not even
Yeah, right.
I don't know, a woman. But
Yeah,
like
no
the very
women
idea
in history.
that everybody was like, it's like you do realize people traveled more than that, right? That
Yeah.
we already were fully aware by many of these time periods, lots of different people and interacted with them and didn't matter what color you were. It's like, no, everybody's a white man. Let's go.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
bumped up against that a few times.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
So weird.
I mean, it hasn't happened that much. But I've gotten a little bit of feedback, and certainly publishers have that I've worked with on games where I have just injected some some diversity into. And it's something, honestly. I mean, academically, I do understand it because I've been told what the reasons are that people feel this way, but on a fundamental level, I don't understand it. And
the academic argument's a bit of a stretch, though, sometimes, because
It completely
sure,
is.
a lot of times it's like, there wasn't only just one group of people.
Oh well, even on a, I mean, even if there was, right? Let's just say,
Yeah.
Right. This is
let's just say,
Hypothetically, if there
yeah.
was.
No,
I mean, let's if we talk about Rococo, for instance, right?
Right.
So let's just say hypothetically, it was all white men and women,
Mhm.
and that was it
Mhm.
in France at the time. That's historically accurate. That's the case, 100%. Clearly not the case, but let's just say it was.
Yeah.
If that was the case, I still don't understand the problem, because the game itself, and maybe I'm hyper aware of this because I am the person who applies the theme and the setting, but the game itself is ridiculously abstracted.
Yeah.
I mean, without bursting anyone's bubble, Versailles did not look like that. You know, and I did lots of research into what Versailles looked like, and it does not look like it's how it's represented on the board, right? Why is that not an issue? Right? Nobody says actually Versailles was, this Amanda stories.
Watched it.
Right? Yeah. I've never ever
Those
had,
crenellations are so wrong.
right, and they
I don't know what you're doing.
That type of windows, archway, whatever it is.
Right, or fireworks didn't look like that at the time, and to be honest, they probably didn't. All this sort of stuff that is ridiculously abstracted in a game. None of that seems to bother anyone, and especially when people talk about the historical accuracy thing, right? At the time it wasn't this. Nothing was like that. Like literally any game, even the most simulationist war game, nothing that's represented in that game was actually like that. Not a single thing. And not a single thing is represented in its entirety or very faithfully. It's just you pick and choose these things.
You're
right?
Represented in a bizarre vacuum that is.
And you abstract these things and you make it into an experience that is completely removed from what anybody's experience would have been at the time.
Right.
And you completely remove it from any sort of representation of anything, and not just of people, of geography,
houses.
Everything is just completely abstracted. So I don't understand. This is, like, at the core of me, I just go, but it's all wrong, right?
No, you're right.
And
that's I think the idea of I say the quote unquote academic debate is not really an academic debate.
And that's before we even get to the point of, well, actually there were people of other races there. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, let's get all of that now.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it took me 10 minutes of very shallow Googling to find precedents for putting all of the representation that we ended up putting in Rococo on the cards and things like that. It took no time at all. Were there women dress designers and makers. Yes, there were. Here's the name of a few of them, and you go, okay, well, easy, right? And even had I found a definitive answer of no, there weren't. To my mind, honestly, that doesn't really matter, because I'm not representing history. I'm drawing on history. I'm drawing on a setting.
Yeah, I'm drawing a game about dresses, damn it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just so strange to me. Like, nobody mentions the fact that all of the people wearing yellow dresses are in exactly the same pose.
I actually thought that.
That's ridiculous. That's,
because I play yellow.
That's a usability thing, right? Because if they're all in different poses, then it becomes more visually confusing. So if that's a usability concession that people are completely fine with, also, all of the way the rooms in Versailles are organized, etc., it's all usability. It's so we can play the game. Yeah. There are no stairs in Versailles as I have represented it.
Versailles is a single flat story.
You just have to climb up. Yeah.
The windows, it's fine.
And if that's a usability issue, then surely to some degree representation is also a quote unquote usability issue, right? It's a function by which the game says, come play me, to a certain type of people, right?
Yeah. It's just really interesting that it says, don't play me, to a certain other type of people, apparently.
You know what? I'm going to say, I really think they're just the vocal minority.
Except you'd hope so.
Yeah. A game buyer anymore either.
Right. In my experience, that's the case. But again, my experience is not one that attracts that sort of, because of me being who I am. I don't usually, get too much commentary in that regard. Yeah. I do get some really bizarre ones. I did get the first one that I ever got was a private message about Nemo's War, of all things, because Nemo's War has, I think, 5 characters that are, on your ship. You've got like your chief engineer and your things, and some of them are named characters from the book, so obviously they're represented as they're described in the book, but most of them aren't. You've got like I can't remember. There's a chief engineer is definitely one of them. So although there are 0 women in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, to my recollection, I took the opportunity to put some women in those, right? Because again, they could be anything. And I did get a very, very bizarre private message about there's a weird thing sometimes where it's like
chips, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I feel like I know where this is going.
Well, sort of. It's a thing where people assume that you feel how they feel. So it's things like I tend to sometimes get comments like, "Oh, I can't believe you had to compromise your art for, to and it's such a strange thing.
To meet these PC needs,
right?
Of the social justice
to appease the mob and all that, and it's I don't understand it.
It's very odd. And as I said, I really do believe that the vocal minority, I want to say maybe 20 years ago, they're the primary consumer. They are so far removed from who the primary consumer is now that honestly, their opinions don't matter.
But they're just loud and annoying.
Decisions based on them.
Sarah Ship says, in her experience, that vocal minority doesn't want to understand how art is made at all. And so trying to educate them about a given aspect really doesn't work. Sarah's been doing, education around theater for a long time, so she knows. If they don't want to hear you, they're not going to listen. But that's really interesting that you're like, oh, hey, bro, I'm so sorry you had to change your art because of some vocal people who said, oh, there are no women, so you had to put women in there. Doesn't that suck, guy? You're like, no.
I feel your pain of putting a woman on the boat.
Yeah, very strange.
It is a very strange thing. We're almost at time. We're actually past time, but we're having such a good conversation. But before we have to get Price Johnson's question. He asked, when is Glory to Greece coming? That is what Price would like to know.
Glory to Greece. That's an allusion to a tweet that I made a little while ago, which was semi-misunderstood, I think, by some people. Glory to Rome is one of my favorite games, and I would love for it to be available, whether or not whether or not I have anything to do with it. That's presumably not going to happen at this stage because of various legal issues.
Such a strange tale that is.
Yeah, it is. It's very strange, and it's
weird.
such a shame because it's such a great game.
Yeah, it just had really weird art at the beginning, and then
Yes,
a really rare kind of art for the
yes,
Black Box, and then nothing ever again.
and then
Apparently,
nothing ever again. Yeah, it's real strange.
yeah, it is.
It's a big shame.
Did you say that you were going to make one?
Well, no, I made a flippant joke about, if I just made a Glory to Greece, would everyone just turn the other way and turn a blind eye to the fact that I was clearly stealing somebody's game.
At this point, I think even Carl would turn a blind eye. So I'm just happy people are playing it. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Cool. Erica, do you have any last questions for Ian?
I think we've covered everything.
Yeah, that was a good talk. Learned so much about your process. That was wonderful. It was both interesting and I think life affirming for some of our listeners who are also graphic designers. Josh was like, "Preach, brother, preach." And then the rest of us were like, well, "That's what you're doing." Oh, definitely some mind blowing stuff in there about. It's just the simplest thing. Like it's really interesting how the smallest thing will now change how I practice this art called game design, where it's like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense that your components and your icon should be really, really, really close,
part of each other.
Yeah. Because that's what it's representing. All right, so for people out there who are looking to talk to Ian, Ian can be found on Twitter at Ian O'Toole Tweets. That's how you'll know it's him, because he's tweeting at you. And you can see his maybe a little bit out of date website at www.ianotoole.com. He promises to update it someday soon. If you're looking for me, you can find me at Senfeng Lim on Twitter. Erica, where are you?
At Erica Bougueras.
There you go. And Erica, where can people find you real shortly?
Oh, yes. As of Monday, I officially work for Spin Master.
Woo!
Yeah, I'm going to be
awesome.
over as a staff designer at Spin Master. So it'll be me and a whole bunch of ex-Hasbro people. It's going to be really fun. It's going to be funny.
It'll be fun. It'll be great.
Congratulations.
You'll be like the only one who doesn't get all the in-jokes.
Well, you know what I realized? Yeah, they're gonna have mass in-jokes, and then I've also realized I'm like, you guys don't really know a ton about kind of like the rest of the game. Like, so my counterpart that's coming in is ex-Hasbro, but only ever worked Hasbro. Like, he's only ever worked for a mass company.
Just mass
and so all these same things that he's like I just because he doesn't have any awareness outside of mass, and it's amazing how much of a different world that is. As someone who plays in both, you just like, because there's things that I would never, like, there's words that I would never even use when I talk to math people versus hobby people, or like, just, it's such a different audience. So I tune everything I say to that audience. So it's just really funny listening games that it's like, I don't know that game. I don't know that game.
Are you able to say anything about the types of projects you might be working on, or what's not specifically, but
yet. I mean, I know there's one I'm supporting that got announced at least. So I get to work with Eric Lang on Sidekicks for Disney.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know I'm going to support that, but other than that, I don't know.
Great. Yeah.
Cool. And so Erica is going to be not moving on from the show, but definitely moving on in her employment circle.
Right.
Circling around. Also, just in case people didn't know, Erica and I have also taken up co-hosting duties on Ludology, the podcast. So you'll hear us there like twice a month, I think. Roughly. I don't even know anymore how often we're going to be speaking on it. But there's 4 co-hosts, so we're going to rotate, and then we do one kind of group discussion sometime during the, I think the 4th show. So every 8 weeks or something like that, it'll be all of us together. Other than that, if you like what you heard tonight and you want to see more, please do support us at www.patreon.com/maple-syrup. Help keep the lights on here. And once we get out of this whole lockdown situation, we'll be bringing the show on the road as promised, live streaming from events, specifically events that are game design oriented. We'll show your prototypes. We'll go to all the protospiels, all those types of things. That's what we really want to do with the Maple Syrup Show, is lift up the voices of new designers, show your wares to the world, see what's out there.
Help get you some of you people to these places.
Yeah. And just to show people what it's like. All right, Ian, final advice. What is your final advice?
Final advice. So yeah, the main one, which is becoming possible again, is to go to conventions. For me, going to conventions is always worth it, even though I have to travel around the world to do it. Yeah. You just getting in front of people, and projects come out of the weirdest places when you're face to face with people, and they never would in via email. So that's number one, is go and actually talk to people and meet people and get in front of people and form real relationships. I think that is the main one. I did have another one, but it's just slipped my mind.
That's okay. If Ian thinks about it, we can put it on the website, on the Facebook. If you like talking shop, come to www.facebook.com/Meeple Syrup Shop Talk. That is the members only group for this show, where we chat about stuff that happened on the show, but also about game design and industry in general. So come there. Next week on this show, on the Wednesday night show, we have Wesley McGee Saxon, and let's show this, and Rachel Voss, who are two individuals in Toronto area who Daniel Rocky introduced me to, and they're using games to work with people who have mental health issues. And so we're going to hear about what they're doing in terms of using games to make the world a better place. So until then, we will see you next Wednesday. We'll also see you Friday night for Friday Night Forum, where I will have two designers who are mentors or mentees in the tabletop mentorship program come on this
that was
week.
My advice.
We have there you go.
My advice was sign up for the tabletop mentorship program. Thank you for
are you lying?
I'm a mentor. No, I'm a mentor there. I have been this is my third or fourth season of doing it.
It's excellent. It's real fun.
It's great.
Please sign up. Even if you have a lot of experience, guys, you can sign up as a mentee too, to learn something new. Like you can sign up as both at the same time. So I think this,
like, let's say you wanted to be a mentee of in graphic design, you might get Ian O'Toole as your mentor.
You could.
That'd be awesome.
Right? But yeah, make sure just remember, everybody has skills and everything. Everyone has something they want to learn. This is a great opportunity for both. And I think if you get your name in now, I know they just did their assignments, but in a few more months, I think they're at the next.
Yeah, it's every 3-month cycle. So it'll be
somewhere around the end of summer, I think.
July, end of July. Maybe that's when they start up the next one. Another thing that's happening through the mentorship tabletop membership program will be, there's micro grants. Erica and Jesse and I will be reviewing the micro grants for one of the months, just to say, hey, here's $100 to get you through something, like maybe printing out that prototype, maybe paying for a couple hours of of a nanny so that you can get some work done. Maybe it's the gas money you need to drive to convention.
Ticket, right? Or whatever.
Yeah, it's all those things.
One
or
night in a hotel.
Yeah.
Recommend sharing to people though, just to save you money, but yeah.
So yeah, lots of good things happening there. And of course, here at the Maple Syrup Show, we will tell you all about other stuff that is happening, because as the world opens up back again, I'm sure there'll be more opportunities to pitch, to play test, and to get your games published. Until then, we'll see you next week here on the show at 9 o'clock and on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks very much for watching. Ian, it was lovely to have you here. Great to finally talk to you face to face. And we will see you soon. Thanks so much.